Hi, I'm Ben. Welcome to my book corner. Today we're talking indie self-published books, and the one specifically we're talking about is one that I got in my Your Paper Quest subscription box. I will link that down below. And this is Orphan Planet by Rex Burke. This first came out in April of 2023 and is book one of a trilogy with its follow-up books Twin Landing and Starbound also out already. The page count is wrong on Goodreads. It actually comes in at 288 pages, which does include a bit of a prelude for book two, which is Twin Landing. So it's taken me a bit of time to get to this one. Was it worth the wait? Let's find out. As always, we shall talk about the story, characters, world building and presentation before I give my final thoughts at the end. Let's dive in. So, let's deal with first of all, what is Orphan Planet? And this is what I personally class as comfy or cozy sci-fi. There is a good level of humour written throughout this, and even though there are some moments of immense tension, it does feel quite sweet's the wrong word, but it is a comfortable and enjoyable and fun read. The conceit of this one is that this is an alternative history sci-fi novel, with the idea being that climate change has accelerated on Earth and has led to a number of different initiatives, mainly funded by private, very rich people, to either try and fix the planet or to escape the planet. And Odyssey Earth, which is the spaceship within the book, is one such example of this. Launched from the UK in 2006 with a crew of specialists on board, as well as a colony population of people who've had a number of interviews to make sure they are suitable candidates for the new world. And one of these candidates is Jordan Booth. So Jordan is a lecturer, or was a lecturer I should say, and he's not really got a great deal of vavavoom for his life on Earth. He's single, his parents have passed away, there's no real ties holding him down, something that is quite common throughout the crew and the passenger list of the Odyssey. And he joins with the understanding that he will not be awoken until the ship has made planetfall and basic infrastructure is in place, and the whole idea of him going was that he would help to plan and then maintain the new education system on this new colony world. Things, however, have not gone quite according to plan, and a number of months before planetfall, Jordan is revived on the ship, much to his confusion and consternation, and there he discovers that there are children on board, and this was not part of the plan. There were meant to be fail-safes in place to prevent people getting pregnant. Those fail-safes did what fail-safes often do in such cases: failed. And what you have at this point are 6 teenagers who are at that point in their life where they need a little bit of adult supervision. Unfortunately, in the words of the captain, the crew would not be trusted with a hamster, let alone a child, as they're all very much experts in their field, but they're very single-minded, driven, or unique individuals, not best suited to parenting. The initial idea was it was going to be a cooperation between the AI and the entire crew to fetch up the kids. When it was clear that this wasn't working, they revived another teacher called Sam, who dealt with them on their early years and gave them a lot of their education. Sam unfortunately passed away due to a medical condition, and Jordan has been awoken just in time for them to hit, I think it's 16 years old. And what you have here is a number of kids that have only ever known this spaceship and are very, very, very bright. They've had top-rate education. They can think circles around Jordan. He's really there to give them a more human perspective compared to what they've been getting off the rest of the crew. And you have a little bit of tension because, first of all, he's not Sam. He's trying to step into that role. They are smarter than him, or at least appear to be, until something goes wrong and those roles are reversed and actually Jordan comes into his home, because actually he knows in that situation more than they do when something goes wrong at a certain point in the mission. It is not the most original idea in the world. The idea of colony ships being flown out and something going wrong on the way there and people woken up too early is one that we have seen before. However, this does a really, really good job of setting up the interpersonal dynamics, because as much as I really do like this book, this is more about the character interactions than it is the overall story. The story is very much just a framework to drive the characters in this one, and the characters overall, in terms of their basic theming, are very interesting. So I think we should just jump on to talk about those. So let's start by talking about the characters then. I'm only going to go into quite broad strokes with this because I don't really want to spoil any of the arcs in case you go off and read this one, which I highly recommend that you do. So I'm going to talk in a little bit of detail about Sam and a little bit about Jordan, and then in far broader strokes about the teenagers and the crew as well. Starting with Sam. Sam is brought around and has the experience with working with younger kids, whereas Jordan was older. And you get the impression of someone who really did their best to create fun and instill creativity in the kids. A love of films, a love of going down creative thinking and creative crafty endeavours really does come through, and you get a real sense of nurture from Sam rather than teach. And you get this through a number of different things, be it through some insights into how some of the teenagers work and some of the hobbies that they've developed, into some of the dialogue with the crew, and the fact that the kids refer to her as family and vice versa as well. You also have a number of audio logs that Sam left when she realised she was going to pass away, left specifically for Jordan to get him ready for dealing with his new charges. And the explanation that he's not really there, there's nothing that he can really teach them because they'll run rings around him, but he needs to be there to give them the adult grounding that they won't get from the rest of the crew. Now, Jordan is a lot more cynical a character. This is someone who's worked as a lecturer in higher education and has therefore dealt with a very, very different level of kid. Teenagers, specifically, and young adults. And I do kind of get the feeling that this is someone who signed up not really knowing what they were signing up for in many regards. They signed up because they had nothing left for them back on Earth. And they don't really have any ties back to Earth at this point. This is shown with like his personal effects that he fetches on board, which is basically a jumper and a photograph. That's it. And he only brought those because he felt he should fetch something with him. And then when he is woken up on the ship early to deal with kids that shouldn't have been there, he is so out of his depth because he's in space, which he shouldn't be. He should be on a planet. He's dealing with the kids already who are teenagers, when the whole idea was he was to plan the education system before any kids were around. And you have the makings of somebody who is not prepared for the situation they find themselves in, added on to the fact that even though he's a lecturer, he is not especially bright. And this is something that the book acknowledges quite regularly with the often used term, "you wouldn't understand, no offence," something that John himself points out is mainly used in a way to convey offence because he doesn't get a lot of the stuff. Now, in terms of the crew, there are a number of crew members. There's Captain Juno Washington, Terence and Cliff, who are the two medics, are the three that stand out for me. And Gerald as well, who I think worked in catering, if I remember correctly, who is, in a nod to the levels of humour in this, is obsessed with passive-aggressive post-it notes. We all have a work person who's like that. You know it, I know it, it's probably me. But there we go. But what is very, very clear is that whilst the crew is truly, truly brilliant, there isn't a parent amongst them. They're all either laser-focused on their speciality, or they're just not wired in the way to be able to help give an emotional grounding to kids in the nicest way possible. The actual crew that stayed awake for the voyage were all a little bit of a group of misfits and oddballs. And hence why Sam was brought around, and then Jordan as well. And the kids, without going into too much detail on those, are all incredibly smart. Now, the key thing here is they're incredibly smart in terms of the ship. Well, that's all they've ever known, so they can think rings around Jordan very, very, very easily. But as landing occurs later on in the book, it becomes clear that that is so overwhelming, so far beyond what they've experienced so far. The comment of the sky just goes on, and the sense of scale of the world is totally lost on them. And you realise that whilst they are very book smart, they are not common sense smart, in terms of the natural world at least. And they do make some very dubious decisions both on the ship and afterwards. Now, special mention here to Poole, who is my favourite of the teenage characters. He is such a lovable idiot in many, many ways. This is the person who will jump in the water first and then realise the stupidity of what they've done, but when you really, really need him to, he pulls through with something absolutely out of left field or brilliant. And very much a lot of the time, Poole and Carlin as well were both highlights in terms of the stupidity of youth, we shall call it, to be polite. But what's really good here is the interactions, because you have a natural flip in the story when things go wrong, where the roles are kind of reversed, because in many regards, whilst Jordan was the teacher and they were his charges, really he wasn't there to teach them, because he didn't need to, because they already knew how the ship worked. It's all they'd ever known. He's never known it, so he was very much the fish out of water. And when things go wrong and it gets flipped, it becomes clear that actually Jordan was the right person, and he begins to impart his knowledge. He starts to win the respect of the teenagers as well. Finally, a quick mention for the AI as well. Reeves, who is incredibly condescending to everybody because of how much smarter he is. There are a number of gags involving Reeves as his intellect gets diminished due to some things that happen within the story, and how much he dislikes this. But also, he does play on that I'm your AI overlord and I could kill you all to win, but in a humorous way, and a lot of the humour does derive from interactions with him. Add to the fact that Jordan doesn't particularly like him and finds him a little bit irksome, just adds to the dynamic overall, especially as teenagers have spent more time with him probably than anybody else. So Reeves is very much almost their uncle, as it's referred to in the book, to all regards. So overall, the character work is really good and the interactions are absolutely stellar. In terms of world building then, and there's some interesting, very small details in here which are worth bearing in mind, which a lot of books don't take into account. The first one is the admission that whilst climate change is getting worse, it's not yet at the full tipping point, and the colonisation and ships like the Odyssey Earth are a byproduct of what could happen, but they're not the only irons in the fire. There are other Odyssey Earth type excursions from other countries going on. There's looking at colonising in system, on the moon, in space stations. There's also ways of looking at shoring up shorelines to prevent flooding, or even reversing the climate change altogether. And I quite like the fact that that's acknowledged, that this isn't quite at the point of no return, which is actually unusual to see in a lot of books like this, so I appreciate that. The other thing is the depiction of the Odyssey Earth as basically just this dull, well, not dull, that's the wrong word, but very sterile steel environment. All clean and sharp lines. But that's it, it's just clinical. It was built for function and nothing else. And that makes sense when you consider the idea that it was meant to be these specialists who didn't really care about any about that. They just cared about their job. So why would it have those extra flourishes? And there was plenty of stuff there that people could use to entertain themselves. They had movie nights and stuff like that. Something to just keep them going. But the ship itself is very straightforward, very logical, very regimented. And that really does contrast really well when things go a little bit wrong and you get planetfall. And you have that flip where, well, nothing is predictable anymore. Nothing is straight, clean lines. You have animals, you have plants, you have a whole world that is alien. You don't know exactly what's there and what you can and can't eat, what the weather's like, whether there's intelligent life. And also the admission that even though they'd done, like, scans, for want of a better term, before getting there, those scans were done from a long way away, a long time ago. You can't really know the true nature of the planet from those. So that is another little tidbit that's worth mentioning. And the other thing as well is to do with the crew, and it is touched upon. I mentioned it in characters as well. Nearly everybody on the crew had nothing to stay on Earth for, and it is very much, even when you look at the passenger manifest, a group of oddballs and misfits and runaways. And that kind of makes sense because the Earth wasn't quite at tipping point at that point. But these are people that didn't feel the connection there, so some of these would have just been people who just want to go out and discover, because wanderlust is a very human thing, to go out and try and discover things, or to perfect the various technologies. Whatever it was, they were very much the oddballs of society in many regards, even the more normal ones, and I like that. It makes sense considering where Earth was at that point. So overall, there are a lot of very, very little points in here that do an exceptional job of building up the world in general. And even though there's nothing groundbreaking, there's nothing vast and sweeping and massive descriptions, but even when you hit planetfall, everything is familiar but just different enough so that it doesn't feel totally alien, but it's certainly not Earth. And that helps make this feel a lot more approachable than a lot of sci-fi does to me personally. In terms of presentation, what this really does hammer home is the found family trope, and it's a popular trope for a reason. And by the end of the book, you do kind of get the feeling of family with Jordan and the rest of the kids, and the slightly diminished version of Reeves that you get here. Also, none of the characters are annoying. Even the crew, who are a bit asympathetic at the best, have these little quirks which makes them an entertaining read, and that fetches me to the humour that is laced through the book. There are a lot of nods and winks in here that are just on the right side of satire or sardonic wit. It is a very British sense of humour, which is something that I do refer to quite often. There are big elements of sarcasm in here, which is the superior form of wit as far as I am concerned. And it does make you sort of really start to root for Jordan, who's a fish out of water in many regards. And as you start to feel the relationships grow, you really do get a sense of growing respect, and it draws you into those almost familial relationships, which is really, really well done. A couple of things I would have liked, and this is nothing to do with the writing style, but I would have loved a schematic of the ship. Just because I like maps and I like ship schematics, and I'm a nerd. But, you know, that's a very, very minor complaint. But overall, this is a very, very easy read. I read it in 2 sittings, I think it was, which I don't think is bad going for nearly 300 pages. And it did make me want to see what was happening next, even though you never got this real sense of great jeopardy in many regards. You kind of always felt like everything was going to be okay, but they were still engaging enough to keep you reading, and that is really difficult to do if you don't necessarily think the jeopardy is true jeopardy. And a lot of that is caused by the humour and the interactions between Jordan and the teenagers. So, really enjoyed the writing style of this. Final thoughts then. I'm definitely going to continue with this series. I really, really enjoyed this. I wish I'd got to it a little bit earlier on in the month. But I think there's some very good character interactions, and I love the humour in particular in here. The concept is a solid sci-fi one, but the other thing I like as well is that this doesn't feel like hard sci-fi. This feels like comfy sci-fi, because sometimes I'll read sci-fi and I feel a little bit thick. This never made me feel like that. There was science in here, but it was very much hand-waved away as you wouldn't understand, because we're looking at this from Jordan's point of view, and Jordan won't understand, so why would they explain him all this stuff in technical jargon and technobabble, which you quite often get in things like Star Trek? You wouldn't, and I appreciate that, because it made the book a lot more accessible than a lot of other sci-fi can be at times, and that's why I'm saying that this is more like a cozy sci-fi novel than anything else, and I really did enjoy that. I gave this 4.25 stars out of 5 over on Storygraph. Absolutely recommend you give this one a check out. I'm definitely going to read Twin Landing at some point in the next couple of months. Well, that's my thoughts on this one. What sci-fi books do you recommend? Because I don't read enough sci-fi, and I'd like to read some more, especially if it's cozy. Let me know in the comments below. I'll catch you all soon.